On June 3rd, a week after the George Floyd incident, Haverford College's official sports Instagram sends out their sincerities about the event, expressing their emotional grief about the situation and providing a message of coming together. There was some disagreement on the phrases used and ones omitted. That same day, another post was issued of a formal apology for Wendy Smith about her statement. She adds in the words asked for and links to a page written by President of the college Wendy Raymond 2 days before on June 1st. President Raymond reflects on the national issues and urges everyone to join her on an intellectual journey of anti-racism work and provides resources for such. 4 days later, the newly formed Haverford Athletes of Color Coalition publishes an article to the Haverford Clerk, directed at both the statement and apology published by Wendy Smith. In response to our nation's greatest sin of racism and oppressing re-entering the national spotlight, many Haverford student athletes of color are protesting and raising awareness, yet your response was too little, too late. You were timely in the posting about commencement, but waited a week to address the continued murder of unarmed black folks. Postponing a difficult and necessary conversation does not justify your silence and lackluster response. When you eventually addressed the matter the first time around, you were dismissive of the Black Lives Matter movement. Was it too political? You never mentioned black people, let alone black student athletes at Haverford. Your words lacked substance. Stating that the Haverford student athlete community is, quote, stronger together, quote, and will, quote, fight as one team, quote, was ignorant. Candidly, you gaslit black student athletes who are subject to an oppressive system in which remedy is neither simple nor near. Your inability to issue a timely and appropriate response, even after consulting with some of your colleagues, is a mere symptom of the sustained disregard for POC athletes, and especially black athletes. Although we recognize that you have issued an apology, we will not simply accept it, nor will we comfortably move towards a place of healing until you commit to enacting institutional change. They then propose 4 measures for Wendy to commit to. Ultimately, this letter is not only a condemnation of your recent responses, it is the culmination of all of the years in which the voices of black and non-black POC athletes were unheard and unconsidered. Students have waited far too long for your professed values of inclusivity and diversity to manifest as reality. This interaction between the newly formed coalition and the administration gives us a perfect outline of what the coming events will entail. It can be listed out as so. 1. An event happened. A tragic one linked to affecting a certain group of people. 2. There's a social consensus that there should be a response to this event. There's also coded language of how one should correctly respond, though this code isn't always clear. 3. A response about the event is made by an individual representative of an organization. 4. Something about the response is not within the correct code and is pointed out as such. Soon after, an apology and/or clarification is made from the original poster. 5. The entire incident, both the original response and subsequent reply, is used against the individual and their organization by another group. This group ties themselves to the affected group from the earlier tragic event. 6. The goalpost of what counts as apologizing or being accountable is fluid and ever-changing, or access to those two ideas are forbidden. Forgiveness or sincere recognition of effort is never given. Example, it took too long to make the post, or its quickness in posting is deemed disingenuous. Or, you made the post, but it didn't pass our particular quality test. 7. The original event being responded to by this new group is discarded and fingers point to the floating years in the making the response is tied to and the bigger issue that presumably spawned it. 8. The main functioning of the group is linked to philosophies that protect them from any fair retaliation, disagreement, or attempts at compromising their demands or motives. 9. Any attempt towards the demands that isn't 100% implementation of this group's volition will be used against the individual's organization as proof of them doing nothing or not caring. 10. In everything that happens, nothing is good enough. On June 17, 2020, a document titled An Open Letter to the Bi-College Community is sent to both President Wendy Raymond of Haverford and President Kimberly Cassidy of Bryn Mawr. It opens with a letter addressed to the schools. The recent tragic and terrorizing deaths of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and Tony McDade have at last brought the nation to begin reflecting upon the pertinence and fatal ramifications of whiteness. The fact that Black Lives Matter is a novel revelation for many, including those within the Bryn Mawr and Haverford, quote, community, quote, is a part of the problem. With this awakening of our non-Black peers, once again we are expected to feel grateful or indebted for your coming to the most basic terms of human compassion, but this time we ask for action in place of our gratitude. While encouraging, we cannot wait for non-Black people to choose to accept President Raymond and President Cassie's invitation to action. Black students need and deserve more from this institution that benefits so greatly by having us here. Our lives are worth more than the comfort of leisurely involvement. We, as Black students, do not have the choice to pick and choose when we want to engage with racism, and instead our lives are a daily battle against white supremacy, racism, discrimination, etc. It should come as no surprise to anyone that the white members of the BICO community casually perpetuate anti-Blackness, racism, and several forms of systemic oppression. This discrimination is present at every level of the institution, including the corporation, administration, faculty, professors, and fellow students. What follows are 8 pages of grievances in places such as the academics, social sphere, and sports. Bryn Mawr has an added category entitled Public, which discusses the controversy surrounding the M. Carey Thomas inscription and mementos. What follows is a list of 14 demands. Demand 1. A BICO course on Blackness and white privilege as part of the college-wide requirements implemented in the next academic year. Demand 2. The formation of a credit-bearing, community-building summer program for FGLI students at Bryn Mawr. Demand 3. An increase in representation by hiring Black faculty and faculty in color, and in both colleges, as well as retention for current faculty and creating new positions dedicated to anti-racism. Demand 4. An implementation of yearly faculty diversity training encompassing cultural competency and the need for social justice in their day-to-day work. Demand 5. The implementation of a reparations fund towards a yearly allocation of funds to Black students in the form of grants for summer programs, affinity groups, multicultural spaces, and individual expenses such as books, online courses, and therapy. Demand 6. The college's formal recognition of Black History Month as well as allocating funds for events to be hosted. Demand 7. The removal of M. Carey Thomas's name inscribed on the old library building facade. Demand 8. Bryn Mawr and Haverford College take an active role in police and prison abolition. Demand 9. The immediate creation of an Africana Studies major. Demand 10. Bryn Mawr College Special Collections recognize the history and ongoing colonial racism that the existence of the, quote, African collections, quote, commit on their website, and that Haverford take these actions regarding the artifacts on display in the Kinsk and other campus locations. Demand 11. A revision to course evaluations to include a question concerning the racial climate of the classrooms. Demand 12. Both colleges follow in the footsteps of our peer institutions and make monetary contributions to local Black Lives Matter efforts. Demand 13. Protection and support for Black students and staff of color, an annual report similar to the Clearness Report for Black staff and staff of color, access to apply to the Reparations Fund, and the offering of a free semester at Haverford or Bryn Mawr for staff of color/Black staff. Demand 14. We demand that Haverford and Bryn Mawr College respond to each of the individual above demands in the form of concrete action and change. First, we expect a statement issued within 2 weeks' time in response to this letter, and a timeline created by the end of fall 2020 semester detailing how specific demands will be fulfilled. Should our college openly refuse or fail to meet these demands within the given time period, 2 weeks' time, we are prepared to be uncooperative within standard college procedures and expectations until expeditious, recognizable, and vigorous efforts are made. Most of these demands are not out of the ordinary from what has arisen out of most college protests. The common theme of revising policy, more leadership, increasing resources and/or diversity, specific training, curriculum revisions, and increasing support services were found analyzing 80 different demand lists by student activists. The outliers here are numbers 7, 8, 12, and 14. These include taking the name off a property because of the inscribed dead individual's beliefs, being active in police abolition, giving money to other nonprofits, and a demand for timeliness. The school had to respond to this letter in 2 weeks and give a timeline by the end of fall detailing how these demands would be met. This letter is signed by 13 individuals and includes over 2,500 signatures of support. It's July 1st, and 2 weeks have gone by since the sending of the open letter. Both Haverford and Bryn Mawr's president responded to the letter. Each president thanks the writers for their work and bravery and explains the ways they will continue or begin to show support for the majority of the demands. There were a couple disagreements or negations. The Reparations Fund wasn't instituted as the demands stated. It couldn't be for Black-only students due to federal anti-discrimination law, but both schools promised some fund that could be used by any students for the resources stated within the demand. Direct donations to other nonprofits would negate the nonprofit status of both schools, but both agreed to further conversation or other means of using the school's educational purpose for racial justice. In terms of an active role in police abolition, situation, both colleges gave an answer of, "Can't necessarily do that, but we're open to further conversation." Both schools agreed to the last demand of having a framework of how these demands could be realized by the end of fall semester. On that same day, a small commotion happens regarding an incoming freshman's social media posts. An anon post is made on Black at Haverford's Instagram, which leads to a reply from the official Haverford Instagram stating they revoked an admissions offer to the said student. The student's actions and questions came to light in earlier June and had a smaller, more local commotion during that time. The AOCC posts about the incident in the same manner they did the past incident, negate around the fact they got what they wanted, admissions revoked from the individual, somehow still find issue in that, and slip in some demands. The rest of July is lackluster in events between the BSRFI and administration. What can be seen is this group and others' beginnings of impatience towards the administration's quote anti-racist quote efforts, and a growing call to band together for justice. An article posted on July 15th laments back on the usage of the words in both Wendy Smith and Wendy Raymond's, not allowing any room for acknowledging improvement or well-intended action. This corporate compassion reads like it was pulled from a manual. Raymond's statement, on the other hand, unironically challenges the community to become anti-racist. Quote, "For if not Haverford, where?" Quote, "This language suggests that Haverford is somehow above the fray of other institutions, unique due to the, quote, Quaker values of equality, quote, at its core." On July 16th, the BSRFI's Instagram page shares thanks to those who have shown support and states, "We must continue to apply pressure to have our letter's demands met." This call seems out of place given the response both Cassidy and Wendy gave of following through on presenting a timeline in implementing/showing progress of the demands by the end of fall, which is what BSRFI asked for in Demand 14. As they state, it had only been a month since the letter was sent out. This gives both schools 5 more months to present the timeline. On July 22nd, an article was posted remarking on why President Raymond should give vocal support towards the Free the People strike, a hunger strike directed at the state governor regarding his actions of a signed reprieve order of freeing 1,800 individuals from prison. This comes from Wendy answering a comment about the supposed need for the school's support of the strike from an earlier interview done by the Haverford clerk, where she states, "I'm not seeing a direct connection between de-incarceration efforts during the pandemic and being safe on campus at Haverford. We don't want to conflate general public health risks across the whole Commonwealth of Pennsylvania with local public health risks on Haverford's campus." The author connects the 4 main bullet points found in Wendy's response to the BICO letter to their argument why she should give institutional support of some sort towards the strike. As current students and alumni, we are now calling on Haverford to make an unambiguous public statement supporting the Free the People strike and to become active in the fight for de-incarceration. Although President Raymond and the college have responded with statements claiming to support BSRFI's demands, it is clear that the college must bring credibility and action to the words students have heard from the administration thus far. A public statement from President Raymond and the college supporting the Free the People strike is one small opportunity to demonstrate its commitments. Making a continued commitment to de-incarceration work is another. When an event happened which calls for an announcement of recognition, the words were poked at and criticized. The apology for the wrong words but the correct words were not taken seriously. The whole situation was used by a group of people to demand the institution impose their particular way of fighting injustice. What guarantee is there that this other group of political hunger strikers would not use any dissatisfaction found in a response from Wendy to further their own beliefs? Tangent aside, on August 5th, members of the BSRFI and allies met with the senior staff. This meeting was later aired out to the community via Instagram as being incredibly disappointing. In a timeline created by BSRFI of events between the BICO letter and the strike, they described the events as follows. While paid staff at the college were unprepared for the meeting, the unpaid black women of BSRFI had taken their due diligence to ensure the safety of black people on campus, yet were met with nothing. Most of the demands from the original open letter have still not been implemented. In initial conversations with BSRFI, President Raymond seemed more concerned with protecting the confidentiality of communications between the groups and the college than about quickly and decisively putting their plans into action. The quote, "demands from the original open letter having still not been implemented" shows another instance where the BSRFI aren't standing by their own word from Demand 14. The meeting was to clarify the black pedagogical requirement, hiring and retention of black faculty, reparations fund, and the creation of the Africana Studies major. The original stance stated by Wendy in her response to the BICO letter shows willingness for a black pedagogical requirement with the connotation that faculty must be involved and lead the change. She stated previous work of hiring and retention of black faculty has been done and will continue. The reparations fund couldn't be fully realized as a black-only reparations fund due to federal anti-discrimination law. And the Africana Studies major proposal was also supported, although with some clarification. What conspired in this meeting regarding these questions about the demands is left unknown. The original Instagram post about the meeting reads, "While the BSRFI noted a lack of preparation preparation from the president and senior staff to addressing our short/medium-term concerns. We hope to receive concrete action items from them to actively dismantle institutional racism at Haverford. BSRFI also hopes to find new ways to balance the labor with senior staff without unpaid students having to direct and redirect laborers' conversations. BSRFI aims to advance conversations of anti-racist initiatives without disproportionately overburdening Black students in this work. We will continue to voice demands for committees and branches specifically dedicated to accountability for such action plans. We hope to meet with the president and senior staff in the following weeks and expect to receive more updates from the college on their intentions to do this work without an over-reliance on BSRFI to guide their entire conversation and its goals. With this growing urgency to see demands in full fruition long before the expected time, the BSRFI have created another standard, the dilemma of labor, monetization, and authority. They have set themselves as the only group to harbor the correct knowledge and insights to know where these issues of racism and discrimination lie, and are very vocal on how draining using this knowledge for their work is. With this, they use their status as students and unpaid patrons to say, "We can't do all this work. You can't have over-reliance on us for this work, but don't do anything without our agreement." The admin cannot do anything outside of the approved measures and controls the BSRFI has set for them, all while BSRFI negate themselves from the most important trait that comes with authority, harboring responsibility. September rolls around with the initiation of the BICO Mutual Aid. It stated in their mission that, "We want to acknowledge that many services and forms of aid we attempt to provide to students in the community are resources that Haverford and Bryn Mawr should already be providing, and are failing to support their students with. Keeping this in mind, BCMA can exist not only to fill these requests, but also to aid and support in forms of advocacy and pressure on our college's administration to better provide for their students. We recognize that while mutual aid is a crucial step in filling the basic needs of students in the short term, this work must happen simultaneously with broader, systemic, anti-capitalist, anti-racist, anti-colonial change. Should already be providing and are failing to support their students brings into question the role of an educational institution to its students. Calls for funds to support someone's housing may fall in line with the school's mission to provide dormitory living for those enrolled in residency, and thus, if these individuals were enrolled in housing but somehow were not given what they paid for, then yes, the college failed them. However, looking through the GoFundMes of grocery bills, hurting and sick families, or gender-affirming activities broadens the scope way further than what most would think of what an educational institution should be providing. On the 28th, Wendy announces new initiatives towards supporting research and underrepresented students in STEM, internships focused on justice and equity, anti-racism teaching and research, and LGBTQIA support. Also announcing 2 funds named after herself and her husband towards anti-racism programs and LGBTQIA student programs. BSRFI describes this article by stating, "She credits a group of Black Haverford and Bryn Mawr students, Black students refusing further in action, BSRFI, for the contributions they made towards the anti-racism initiatives launched, but still never cites the group members by their names." On October 25th, President Wendy held an event for prospective FGLI students called Have a Look. BSR documents it as follows. During her speech, she spoke about Haverford's plan for anti-racism work, completely co-opting the work of the women of color in BSRFI without mentioning anything about the concerns that led to the creation of the plan or the students who worked so hard to make the plan a reality. Rather than commit to crediting and honoring these students, the president chose to use their message to market Haverford through the vision of women of color, when the realities of the college's administration are rooted in white administrators refusing to take action on the issues that these women of color have tried to resolve. The Have a Look program was eventually canceled before the scheduled end of the event as a result of the students who coordinated the program expressing their discomfort in continuing to advertise the college to students of color after the response by administration. On October 26, 2020, Walter Wallace Jr. was shot by Philadelphia police officers. When the 2 officers arrived, Wallace walked out of his house carrying a knife. The 2 officers backed away while telling him to drop the knife shortly before they each fired several rounds. He later died from his wounds in the hospital. Wallace's family stated that Wallace was having a mental health crisis due to his bipolar disorder. Peaceful protests and disruptive riots began to fill the October days and nights to come. 2 days after the event, in the early afternoon, BSRFI's Instagram posts information about Walter Wallace and protests happening in Philadelphia. They tie their open letter in Haverford to a bigger structure that are perpetuating these events around them, and urge anyone who supported their open letter to support the protests and mutual aids being offered at this time. Not long later, in the early afternoon, President Wendy and Interim Dean Joyce Bylander sends out an email to the Haverford College community. "We write because our sadness is accompanied by alarm. That alarm is for you. While we all might be tempted to join protests about this tragedy, we are imploring you to temper that impulse. Now is not the time to go to Philadelphia. Our fear is that for every righteous protester in the street, there are other actors afoot, and we have seen this across the nation far too often, in cities large and small, in college towns and urban centers. There are individuals who might seek to spin this moment out of control and cause harm and havoc. Joining a protest off campus not only only would not bring Walter Wallace back, it could play into the hands of those who might seek to sow division and conflict, especially in vulnerable communities. Don't put yourself in harm's way this weekend. Let's come together to make our voices and demands heard safely, in community here on campus and virtually. Safety in terms of COVID-19 and of the risk of individuals who would harm you further for harm's sake. Let's fight for democracy at the ballot box, and then let's hold elected officials accountable for putting in the programs, resources, and reforms that make tragedies like this a real thing of the past. You received a notice about a special community worship on Friday, 4 to 5 p.m. in Founders Courtyard. Consider silent protests. Consider vigils, socially distanced, of course, on Founders Green, on every lawn we have. If you plan such a vigil and share that information, we will show up. Please think carefully about your actions over these next few days. Please stay safe. In sadness, love, and concern, Wendy and Joyce. Reactions began to stir and bubble over in a matter of hours towards Raymond and Bylander's word and sentences choices. An Instagram post circulated calling for a sit-in that evening, along with an article articulating grievances towards the email. My question for both Raymond and Bylander is, while your alarm is valid and we are in the midst of a global pandemic, how and why did it manifest in you simply pushing students to not protest? Why was your email, which should have focused on the Black community in Philly and create a place to grieve for our Black community, so tone deaf? Why you wrote the sentence, joining a protest off campus not only would not bring Walter Wallace back, did you not read it twice and smell the detachment and apathy it reeks of? I am disappointed beyond measure today and embarrassed at my association with Haverford. This email has created a rift in the community which shall prove impossible to repair in the days and months to come. As stated in the email, it was not a request to not protest, but a request to protest in a specific manner that keep the Haverford student COVID bubble safe, along with past protests turning deadly because of other actors afoot. The disagreement here is of control and display, not of Wendy and Bylander not caring. That same evening, an email from a group of BIPOC students identified as Students in Concern was sent to the student body. It criticizes Wendy's stance of not going out to protest as being against vulnerable communities, and her statement of other actors afoot holds no truth and only rehearses white supremacist tropes. At 10 p.m., students met at Founders Green on campus, and at 10:01 p.m., Wendy and Joyce sent out an email clarifying their positions, reiterating that their position was for the safety of students going off campus in the midst of COVID, and their comment about other actors afoot was in reference to high police presence in past protests turned deadly. They again reiterate their concern for students, mention on-campus health and activities that can be done during this time of grief. It should be noted that in the open letter from the soon-to-be-formed strike organizers, the first email is called egregious, and the follow-up clarification to it is deemed as gaslighting and thus not taking full accountability for the harm the original email caused. By this time, already more than 700 students dispersed themselves among Founders Green. Throughout the beginning, students came up and voiced their grievances of the school. Telling us to temper this impulse is deeply offensive. We are not out of control. The system is, one said. A silent vigil is simply not a viable alternative to protesting. We have a voice and it deserves to be heard. We know the risks, said another. When us Black people say we are not heard, not protected, it's because it's fucking happening. A Bryn Mawr student said that showing up is only half of what we need to be doing. We have to hold Haverford and also Bryn Mawr, Swarthmore, and other schools accountable, not only because Haverford's president sent an inappropriate email, but because Haverford's entire history is inappropriate. One student stated, I heard President Raymond is in the crowd tonight, and I would like to respectfully ask her to step her ass up here and explain yourself for the bullshit that was in that email. A protester demanded to know,
what tangible systems? Right! Yes, ma'am!
See that chip?
Am I going to implement to support our students? Our Black students. Yes, so we have multiple things in place that bear repeating, and I look forward to hearing your critique and your dissatisfaction. And none of this can happen fast enough. We are, right? I get it. So there's a $40,000 annual fund established in the dean's office for reparations in response to Black students refusing further inaction, requesting a fund to support Black and other BIPOC students in all kinds of ways. The ways are to be determined through Dean Bylander's work with you, with Black students and staff and Dean's staff that she will bring into that process. So that's one thing. Another thing is through the curriculum, through our support for expanding Africana studies, for focusing toward a major, for focusing on the retention of Black faculty and the hiring of more Black faculty, to a focus from the Educational Policy Committee, which is a student, staff, faculty committee, on the proposal for a required BICO course. We only have control here for Haverford, but there are BICO conversations on whiteness, a focus on white privilege, whiteness and blackness, whiteness and race. Not clear what the title will be or how that will be implemented. So those are the three foci: is funding for student support, change in the faculty in terms of recruiting and supporting, and hiring Black faculty at Haverford College, and changes in the curriculum. Curricular changes will be widespread as well, and as you know, the faculty own the curriculum here, so what Provost Linda Strong-Leak and I are doing are supporting that faculty development, as well as the support for faculty who have long been committed to anti-racism, our Black faculty and other faculty as well, whose work in scholarship and teaching and pedagogy has long been anti-racist. We are supporting them and others then who are on their journey to diversify their curriculum to include anti-racism pedagogy, anti-racism topics, anti-racism courses.
How about the communities that your department study off? Like anthropology, sending people over into Philly to, study and go into one of those stores. The one VCAM class that they went to Ross and they was talking about you see how ghetto this is? Does this make you uncomfortable? How about those? How are you going to support those communities? How are you going to support the Ardmore community that you bought out HCA, because we all know it's the ghetto? You bought them out, you displaced them. And I've spoken to many community members, and they used to talk about how they, as kids, will be able to walk through the campus. But now they don't feel comfortable after the many actions that have negatively affected them. So how are you going to do, what's the school going to do about that? About supporting that community?
Yes. I'm happy for you to take the mic at any time, anybody. The question was about how are we supporting the Ardmore community with a history of not only not supporting it, but actively taking property away, buying property from people and displacing them. And so the reparations fund will also be toward that support of the Ardmore community. We are certainly supportive of pedagogy and classes that are moving into Philadelphia. We don't have current direct support for communities in Philadelphia, but you're absolutely right to direct us right here at home to our Ardmore community.
First, I want to say that words are not enough.
A remote student who was zooming into the event demanded answers from Raymond. Why weren't Black students a priority? There were lots of emails from our sister schools that said, "We feel your pain," they said. Addressing Dean Bylander, they continued, "I'd ask you to look at yourself and think about how you're complicit in this too. It isn't just white people who bring us down." As the clock struck 11 p.m., Bylander also stepped forward from the crowd and was given the microphone. She stated that, "I am complicit in crafting the message to you today," but also that she was complicit in being concerned. She explained that her background growing up during the Cleveland riots and her position as a mother prompted a worrisome attitude towards the student life. "Do what you feel you need to do, but be safe," she said. "There are people who don't care at all about Black lives. I fear that there are people who will seize this moment for evil. The work of Black women in particular has been co-opted. We appreciate that y'all are doing the work with the letter, but without publishing our names, that's taking our work and not giving us credit. When you talk to admission students and brand yourself as an anti-racist platform, that's co-opting our work. Our work is being used to attract money and donations from the school. Shout out to all the Black women on this campus, because it literally couldn't run without us." They then marched through the streets around the area the campus resides. Police presence existed, but did not actively do anything beyond watch over the event. Around 1 a.m., the crowd meets back on campus for some final words and announces the initiation of a strike against the Haverford administration. "We're not going to class, we're not going to do work, we're not doing anything." Some blessed soul in the crowd just asked, "Why not?" Because if the president is just going to stand for everything she said in that email, she's going to face the consequences for that. We're staying home. First of all, if you are not following the accounts of BSRFI Haverford or BICO Mutual Aid, you seriously need to evaluate which platforms you have been paying attention to in the midst of all of this. Haverford AOCC stands firmly in our support of the BIPOC community-led strike. Racism is a radical issue which has persisted not only in America, but in the Haverford community as well. BIPOC students have received the minimum level of support expected from a, quote, anti-racist institution. BIPOC work has been exploited, undermined, and weaponized under the college as a shield for their negligence in failing to address the legacy of racism at our school. Students of color, especially Black WMICs, are forced to do the emotional and physical draining labor of mobilizing coalitions in effect to undo the decades of harm perpetuated by white students and administration alike. The death of Walter Wallace Jr. at the hands of the Philadelphia Police Department took place 5 miles away from campus, and this community's silence has been deafening. It hurts to even write this. Do y'all even care? Oh, liberals and partisan groups like Haverford Dems and Students for Biden, stop telling students who are grieving from police violence and its trauma to vote. It's extremely insensitive and corny. Y'all been doing this since June. It's time to be frank. Student athletes at Haverford College have benefited from experiencing high levels of social capital and influence in the community and beyond. Period. For so long, members of this community has turned a blind eye to injustice because of the immensely concentrated privilege in Haverford athletics. Why do we have to keep creating long posts to have you pay attention to us? Varsity teams posted a lot about the Black Lives Matter movement during June in their hashtag Blackout Tuesday less than 3 posts and reverted back to silence by August. You are not anti-racist nor radical without actively dismantling the blatant racism and elitism that persists within your teams. A lot of you only listen to the members of the AOCC because of our proximity to your teams. Do non-athletic BIPOC voices matter to you? Enough of this bullshit. It won't be tolerated anymore. Being anti-racist is not just a 1 or 2 day performance. It's a commitment to not being complicit in the perpetuation of racist systems on campus and beyond. Student athletes must be conscious of their role on campus, our community, and systemic racism as a whole. Neutrality is not an option. You are either part of the solution or complicit in the problems. Those with generational wealth, second homes, fancy cars, it's time to distribute. In solidarity with the strike, you all need to be redistributing your funds directly to BICO Mutual Aid to support BIPOC, FGLI students, student workers, and others striking. The time to step up is right now. Athletes, coaches, and department heads, it's time to wake up. In solidarity with the BIPOC community's physical, emotional, and educational labor for the strike, start by redistributing your wealth to BICO Mutual Aid immediately. October 29th is the official first day of the strike. Although many of the organizers of this strike stem from the individuals from the BICO letter, they've now become the collective identity noted as Women of Color House, Black Students Refusing Further Action, Black Student League, and every single BIPOC student this institution has failed. Because they, the organizers, are the harbiters of when a name should be stated for credit or instead when a group should be. Demand 1. We demand removal of President Raymond as Chief of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. There's no further elaboration on this point. Wendy herself has been working in the field of diversity, equity, and inclusion since 2007, and was the first ever Associate Dean for Institutional Diversity at one of her past employers, Williams College. Her position right now is also on an interim basis. Demand 2. We demand that you follow in the footsteps of Swarthmore College and cancel classes on Election Day and provide paid leave for college employees. This is an odd request given the groups assigned onto this demand list have had distaste towards any mentioning of voting, and explicitly stated their distaste in an open letter attached to the beginning of these demands. Demand 3. We demand academic leniency for BIPOC and or FGLI students who are traumatized by the effects of COVID and constant police violence in their communities. As Wendy had stated before in her response to the BICO letter, professors have autonomy over their courses, whether that be changes to curriculum or grading. That's done by the professors individually or group approval. The admin does not have authoritative control over the work of the professors. Haverford also allowed a pass/fail grade option for the spring of 2020, which is the most appropriate and approved overreaching decision the admin could make. With the semester existing in unprecedented times for everyone, having a this group only exception that's authoritative in nature isn't right. Also, many students and professors stated of having BIPOC individuals who found going to classes a valuable activity for them during this time, which the class cancellation in support of the strike would hinder and stress them out. In a letter sent to STEM faculty urging support and class cancellation for the strike, these individuals were labeled as privileged POC students. Demand 4. We demand that the school encourage and protect student participation in supporting direct action. Key word here is abolition work, which is work that is directly in conflict with the college's existence, as stated by one organizer in a meeting held on November 2nd.
And if we were going to root out the entirety of the racism, sexism, classism, elitism, et cetera, of Haverford, we would have to get rid of it as an institution. And I don't really think that the administration is ready for that conversation. Most people aren't. So
we have to, one, realize that the radical change that we would probably need from this institution is a full abolition of the current structure of higher ed. And we have asked for things before, and we have to present ourselves in a professional way, even though professional is a construct of white supremacy. But to add on to that, if we were to strive towards abolition right now with COVID, with many students who are like queer and trans kids of color, this is their only option for housing. This is their only option for food. And we would be putting Black and brown lives at risk if we were to do something radical enough to have administration kick us off of campus.
They state the several ways to accomplish this. A is a forking of a previous demand from the BICO letter that, quote, wasn't answered, or at least the organizers didn't like the answer. The college cannot donate to other nonprofit groups as a nonprofit. B could be reasonably done, although direct could lead into the same situation A is in, and both C and D are very particular to the event that seemingly spurred the strike. It would be unnecessary to set in stone rules that won't be applicable come a year or so. Although the argument is that there will always be protests and coalitions against the admin and injustice, so these demands are seen as preparing for the years to come. Demand 5. We demand the institution recognize and resolve that the increased surveillance and policing among students in regards to COVID-19 primarily affects students of color. There is no elaboration or any tangible data given to validate this claim, and by data, I mean a measurable amount that's been documented reliably and thoroughly, not to say incidences of these have not happened to individuals. Demand 6. We demand Haverford honor and credit the work of Black women driving institutional change instead of taking credit for their continued labor and erasing their contributions. The goal of what counts as giving credit has changed continuously from June till now. Along with the organizers not following through on the principle within this very document, they pit Wendy against regarding, quote, naming individuals. The only instance when the school made public their anti-racist efforts since the BICO letter did state the student groups for credit, just not their, quote, individual names, which was the criticism made by the organizers. Demand 7. We demand that the school create a framework to deal with problematic professors and generate spaces of accountability. The honor code is not enough, and it never has been. This has some callbacks to BICO Demand 3 and 13 in regards to the POC professors. The honor code was mentioned as a not enoughism in regards to their handling of microaggressions in the BICO letter, but nothing about the professors. An FAQ document sent in the coming days stated that instances like these are counted under microaggressive behavior from professors. These sorts of situations rely highly on the subjective viewing from the individual student. Some may take this one way and others another. Making rules based on this subjective perception is very unsteady. This could be seen as a forking of the organizers wanting both the admin to agree with them completely, and from that create a program with extreme overreach into professors' classroom activities. Demand 8. We demand that the school continue to pay students who are participating in the strike. This is the first of many appearances which denies the label of this being a strike. You cannot withdraw yourself and disrupt while also demanding that the system comply to your will and continue to act like you're still functioning within it. As you stated, you know the risks of this action. Demand 9. We demand that no student, staff, or faculty partaking in the strike face financial, academic, or professional retribution or penalties of any kind. It's odd to use the stance, we're making sure that individuals striking are getting food and that dining services aren't overwhelmed as something to be mad at the college for not doing. Of course, if you're leading a strike, you're responsible for those who choose to strike, whether a small degree of organizing meetings or a large degree of payment and food. Condemning the administration for not helping you in an action that you chose to do that is supposedly against them is ignorant. Demand 10. We demand that the BICO stop its violence against disabled students. The demand for better wheelchair accessibility and having proper reprimand for ADA violations by a professor are the only doable ones here. Everything else on this list, however, is either borderline illegal or would do more harm than good. Allowing a system that's for needed accommodations to have no bar of who's allowed those accommodations is ground for someone to abuse that system, which could then lead to the devaluation of the college degree because someone kept accommodating their way through classes. Demand 11. We demand more robust aid and support for queer and trans students of color. The claim of the Honor Council's silence isn't elaborated. A and B are terrible, mostly costly, but C and D are forkins of other contentious demands from both the BICO and this list. The demand for leniency and asking for an admin-type power to hold C, SSP, and the professors, quote, accountable still negates the value of professors having agency in their classrooms. D links back to the organizers' terrorist opinions regarding involvement of police force in any of the college's functions. Although, the common recommendation of a social work first approach can be appropriate here, but it could also be assumed that recommendation wouldn't fly unless every little detail was approved by this organizing group who claimed to represent all students. Demand 12. We demand that the college terminate all relationships with the Philadelphia Police Department and actively work towards police and prison abolition. This wasn't ignored. Wendy asked for further conversation and clarification about the topic since she couldn't give an approval stamp upon first glance in the BICO response. The strike will continue indefinitely until the demands have been met and there is institutional change. The Haverford strike lasted for 14 days, with the first day being the drafting of the demands and the last day being the celebration of the latter 13 days of work. This chapter will mainly discuss the interactions of the organizers to admin and the student body. The second day of the strike, October 30th, begins with an email sent by President Wendy, acknowledging the pain many Black individuals were facing. She recognizes the effort from these student groups and gives her deepest appreciation. She goes on to emphasize the right to protest and encourages compassion for those who choose to and not to strike, reiterating how the faculty have agency in how they choose to react to the strike, and also how they have the responsibility to offer a Haverford education along with that, and mentions to follow COVID precautions if participating. From her first review of the demands, she responds to 3 points regarding paying students 20 hours of lost work, election day being a holiday, and what her position of interim chief diversity officer entails. The organizers send out 2 documents, one for outside institutions and students regarding the strike and asking for outside support, and another for Haverford faculty. They describe the strike to other institutions as consisting of not participating in any academic, financial, extracurricular, or political activities. Those same activities allow the corporation of Haverford College to profit off the shadow work of first-generation low-income students, specifically Black women. We are asking you to put pressure on your institutions to respond to the fatal violence towards Black bodies and Haverford's statement. It is time Haverford is held accountable for its actions. In the letter to faculty, it states further, our goal is to disrupt the function of Haverford and bring the institution to a screeching halt until our demands are recognized and implemented by the college administration. To support the urgency of our strike, we ask that you cancel classes and deadlines for coursework until the college has made the institutional changes that we outlined in our list of demands. Throughout the indefinite period of the strike, we ask you to not penalize students for missing class or assignments. They encourage faculty to have necessary conversations to others who aren't willing or aren't informed, because the only reason one could be standing aside from the strike is ignorance and not their own legitimate moral standing. During the 14-day duration, 14 departments and programs extend their solidarity in some fashion towards the strike. Anthropology and the chemistry department were the first to vocalize themselves by canceling their classes and postponing assignments. On the third day, October 31st, the organizers create a document to clarify some points and give announcements. Before we start our updates, we want to acknowledge President Raymond's recent email. President Raymond only responded because staff and faculty are nervous. They are trying to placate us with small concessions to stop our momentum. They are already feeling the disruption of our work, but this is only the beginning. We must keep going. We must get you, the students and the faculty members, to be wholly committed to our strike, so, together, we pressure the administration to make swift institutional changes. The strike cannot succeed if we have a few students turning in work or going to class, which is why it is crucial that you explain to faculty members why they should be committed to our strike and convince them to not penalize us when we do not go to class or turn in assignments. We understand that each person has a different reason for coming to this college. However, we have to remember both within and outside of this college, there has been a global reckoning with social justice, and we cannot put assignments and syllabi over Black lives. Their updates include specifying that going to the dining hall is not crossing the strike picket line, but also urging those who need food to order out or use the Nest, a student-led food pantry, showing that their BICO Mutual Aid has raised over $80,000 and now requests those to donate to other organizations during this time. They also announced 2 town halls coming up and give out a form to send in questions to be answered. On the 4th day, the organizers hold a town hall for student questions. When one student asks how the organizers have been bargaining with the administration, the answer is so. Wendy has reached out on a club-by-club basis. She said she would have responded next week. We're not meeting with her until she responds to the demands. Until she does that, she's just going to be relying on BIPOC to do the work that the admin should have done. Also, in her last email where she listed the 3 things in her demands, we have like 15, so her not addressing the student body as a collective and giving these little details about how she can help, these are performative gestures and do not do the institutional change right now. Don't read her emails thinking she's going to do this because she hasn't with BSRFI, and we need to make sure that those commitments she supposedly has, that they are on a timeline that have information. These bullet points are not enough, and don't let her trick you into thinking these are enough. Everything is with BSRFI. Everything that the school has a timeline. Once they offer us a timeline, that's them showing us that they're committed to doing this work. Last statement, they said they were going to give us $40K, but BCC is falling apart. Where is it? It's not clear here why the organizers refuse any sort of communication with Wendy that isn't in the form of a humaneless document responding to their demands, although their own demand document does say the time for dialogue has passed, which could explain things. Wendy wasn't going to give $40K to someone. She was going to make available a fund that can be requested for certain activities regarding social justice work. The BCC comment isn't applicable here, nor has it been strictly mentioned anywhere in the 2 demands list at this time. Also interesting to note that it's a timeline detailing what the admin will do that gives concession to the organizers, even though they themselves themselves did not give the time they requested and agreed to about the initial demand timeline for the bycode demands. There's another statement made that also proves this point. I'll add that some of us are communicating with faculty who have been in support from the jump. Wendy has reached out to faculty to get a group going to talk about demands. They're talking amongst each other, but not to us. Just a reminder that the demands on the statement are replicating BSRFI. We're expecting this to repeat again. Cutting relationships with police and Ardmore is going to be hard because they flat out rejected it this last time. They did say in the letter that demands would escalate, and things did escalate. It's performative if you agree to this and don't want to follow through. You signed in June, and now you have to act. Another comment is made that is contradicted in another document sent out this day. In regards to students' well-being, an organizer states, "The strike is to bring the institution to a halt, not those in it. You have to take care of yourself. Be conscious that we're in a pandemic. It is just common sense to do things that are good and healthy for you. Don't let things fly out the window. Things are still necessary to take care of." In the strike FAQ document, questions from professors regarding some students' needs in both the well-being and other means for classes to continue, including FGLI and BIPOC students' concerns, the organizers say this isn't helpful. There's also multiple examples of the before-mentioned contradiction of not understanding what they themselves asked for in the bycode letter, since they keep bringing up that the admin, quote, has done nothing, even though the admin had till the end of fall to issue a timeline. There's also an official Google Sheet sent out for students to pledge involvement. Over 800 signatures are recorded, though from the environment the organizers have set of being with or against the correct side of history, it's fair to assume some may have been pressured signatures. It can also be fair to estimate that at least half of those signatures were genuine supporters. The 5th day of the strike rolls around on November 2nd. President Wendy sends her first full response to the demands. Demand 1. Her position was a 2-year interim for her first 2 years of presidency. We'll create a CDO advisory group by December 1st composed of students, faculty, and staff to plan the way forward, which will then be initiated by July 1st. Demand 2. Agreed fully. Any staff working that day will be paid holiday pay. Demand 3. Acknowledges the disproportionate trauma FGLI and BIPOC students are facing, will ask the Task Force on Retention and Persistence to research more into the experiences of said individuals to find better ways of assisting them. Wendy, Provost Linda, and Dean Bylander will engage with faculty and deans on long-term structures and immediate efforts to help said students. Encourages faculty to keep taking extraordinary efforts during this time to help these said students. Demand 4. The college supports students living out their values with integrity. She states how the college supports these efforts through curricular, co-curricular, and extracurricular civic engagement, mentions the 2 fellowship programs initiated this fall that were also mentioned in our article late October, states curiosity in what the statement unused campus resources to directly support impacted communities in West Philadelphia means and is willing to discuss, reiterates their position of the college as a nonprofit, so no donations, and their stance on a student's right to protest as long as they keep themselves safe and know the risks. Demand 5. Agree that this is a systemic and national issue, specifying that they currently do not have any data to point against such bias, but will inform the Operations Planning Group to evaluate and revise the monitoring process to better understand where these biases occur. Demand 6. Apologizes for past errors regarding this and states that libraries and archives are actively working to fully illuminate their work and efforts that may have been previously dismissed. Demand 7. Will reevaluate the faculty personnel and grievance systems and will make a report no later than March 1st. The provost will work with the Faculty Affairs and Planning Committee and others to provide support to tenure and visiting BIPOC faculty. The knowledge of the quote shadow work these professors have to take on will be considered and evaluated on how this work can be evaluated in faculty review processes. Demand 8. Any student striker who works in school may be eligible for 20 hours compensation. Demand 9. Mentions again that providing the 20 hours of missed work and that professors have discretion over their courses. In acts of civil disobedience, individuals must and do make decisions of conscience and consequence. They bring up how, as a college during the COVID-19 first outbreak, they still offered payment and limited their 4 loans and still paid student workers who had to drop spring of 2020 from things out of their control. Demand 10. The access and disability services and facilities, counseling, and psychological services will be the main keys in aiding this work. She lists 6 bullet points addressing certain points of the demands, including continued work on physical accessibility, reflecting on Haverford's diversity while in search of a new CAPS staff member, states that mandated reporting is the law but will take precautions to only use it when necessary and with students' consent when possible, states that some accommodations require a doctor's note and that CAPS can help fund someone in need of a doctor's note, states that faculty must accommodate to an ADA request and can face retribution if this issue is brought up to ADS, and that CAPS will review with campus safety about alternatives of what to do when there's a mental health crisis. Demand 11. Similar to the response above, she lists 5 points to answer this demand. CATS will prioritize hiring those with LGBTQIA counseling, will provide financial support in place immediately for those needing to seek outside counseling, explore the need for having specific hours in place for LGBTQIA individuals. Any trauma with legal documentation of accommodation will fall under the need for the college to assure accommodations are given, and how the new BICO Title IX director implemented a new comprehensive sexual misconduct policy. Demand 12. The college does not maintain a relationship with the Philadelphia Police Department. She goes on to say that there's very little to no indirect exposure to companies that support the prison complex, stating a rate of 0.001% exposure. The investment office has been and will continue to engage with students about this issue and will report survey findings come the end of fall semester. The organizer's initial response reads, "Although President Raymond may feel her response to be genuine, it in fact creates the illusion that progress has been made when it has not. The response was disappointing, incomplete, and rife with the political-like rhetoric of advisory groups, committees, and task force, which is indicative of the very Haverfordian, bureaucratic attempt to placate our anger in the overall movement. Almost all of the demands clearly stated in our letter were not met." They ask for a meeting with Wendy to happen on November 5th only if they heed these precautions. Wendy set the agenda and make public how this meeting will be accessible 24 hours before, the meeting purely be about the demands, and to give a recited statement about the demands by Sunday, November 8th, with clear timelines, transparent budget, and inclusive accountability measures. "We do not seek President Raymond's approval nor her falsified promises. This reads similar to a hollow response to the Black students refusing further actions demands from the past summer, which has remained largely unfulfilled. History continues to repeat itself. We strongly recommend all members of the Haverford community to reflect on our demands and the shortcomings of President Raymond's response." November 3rd is the 6th day of the strike, another day filled with communication and clarification from the organizers. They announce office hours, update FAQ questions, and template emails for students to email to faculty, dean, and the board of managers to continue applying pressure for their demands to be met. This is also the day Bryn Mawr Strike sent their demands out to then initiate their own strike, meaning the rest of the days of Haverford strikes are an overlap with the other school mentioned in the BICO letter. November 4th begins the 7th day, again filled with continued communication. They announce a tweet bomb to noted anti-racist author Dr. Ibram X. Kendi to get his attention about the strike, since his event was postponed due to it. The BSRFI Twitter made a thread detailing the events of the 1972 Black Student League boycott. This is an event often pointed back to when the statement "years in the making" comes up, and different Instagram posts also reflect this. It should be duly noted not only the difference in time period that this event took place, but that according to a statement made by Haverford's president at that time, John R. Coleman, the BSL didn't boycott classes nor pressured professors to do so, and instead used other methods of social disruption that brought the school to a halt and forced reflection. November 5th, the 8th day of the strike, shows us more activities than the past two. The organizers hold a Zoom meeting with Wendy and admin to discuss the organizers' critiques of Wendy's response. This critique also included 2 new demands. One is a goalpost-moving reiteration of the policing demand, and another is for an entirely renewed Black Cultural Center and Latinx Center. There was also a clarified point about the role the school has in returning and respecting Native nations as a demand. The organizers speak about the event as follows. "Members of the administration were rife with apologies and guilt. Your guilt will not erase the 48 years of violence inflicted on Black students, Indigenous students, and students of color on this campus, nor absolve you from your role in that ongoing harm. The administration will send their second response to the demands with concrete action items by Sunday, November 8th at 9 p.m. However, an agreement was reached. Can you commit to vacating your positions if effective changes not occur? Yes. As you agreed, should you fail to fulfill our demands wholly and intentionally, we expect your letter of resignation effective immediately. We refuse to compromise at the expense of the well-being and existence of BIPOC both within and outside Haverford." The only other agreement from the meeting was Demand 3 about Election Day. Every other demand had enough connotation from the organizers to be deemed as ignored or not wholly fulfilled, even going as far as to criticize Linda Stronlich for eating on the call and to both her and Dean Bylander for not being the correct type of Black woman. That same night, the organizers hosted a sit-in to inform the public of what happened at the meeting. In response to certain dissenting views, the organizers rejected these claims outright, arguing that there is no bullying and fighting for their rights and that any community member who opposed the strike are actively preventing the implementation of what they deemed essential changes. Then speakers turned to the open meeting with senior staff held earlier in the day. Though the tone of the response varied, one thing was clear, a feeling that the meeting was far from what it needed to be. Organizers found the bare-bones agenda, which merely listed demands, insulting, and felt the administrators weren't taking them seriously, even though this is exactly what the organizers asked for. One organizer called the agenda the most elementary pile of fucking trash I've ever seen, and said that their brother, a second grader, could have done better. Another was less harsh. On a lot of points, they agreed with us completely, and on the other points, they will agree with us by Sunday. In a particular powerful moment, one organizer, emotion cracking in their voice, encouraged the community to continue striking. Black students have been fighting for 48 years. The strike has lasted 8 days. November 6th brings us to the 9th day. The biology department sends out a letter not only supporting the strike, but a statement declaring that they will cancel classes for the rest of the semester to work on making the biology department more anti-racist. They will replace the class with a seminar that discusses these matters. This letter's dedication and the swiftness of the anthropology's letter of support are the 2 gold stars that set the standard for how the later covered Bryn Mawr strike will desire from their institution. Wendy sends out her first rigorous response to the demands, both new and old, each expanding and detailing the specifics the organizers asked for. There isn't drastic shifts in responses, a personal favorite being Wendy putting her foot down and saying that no, she will not apologize for being a white woman in a diversity officer position. In regards to the newer demands added from the last meeting, she states she cannot return institutional land without ceasing being an institution, but will work on recruitment with a program for Native students. They reiterate their stances about police in regards to their investments and supporting students' work that links to what is dubbed as police abolition. They state a firm no in terminating our relationships, since by law they cannot. They stated yes with qualifications about discussing a cultural center for Black and Latinx students. It should be noted that on the last day of the fall semester, the final work in progress spreadsheet had over 73 rows of demands and specifications. This document was last edited on the same date the initial timeline would have been sent out regarding the BICO demands. The final reorganized version that's still ongoing includes 63 rows of actions. November 7th, the 10th day of the strike, is regarded as a day of rest and joy. November 8th, the 11th day, starts off with communication from the organizers to Wendy. The organizers were supposed to have their second critique of the demands sent to the admin by 3 p.m. Wendy responds stating that since she cannot have the responses by the given time, she won't be able to have the added benefit of their input to discuss later that same day. She then offers a Zoom call for 4 p.m. with herself and Jesse Little, Vice President and Chief of Staff, to see where they're currently standing. At 4:04 p.m., the organizers respond with the critiques of Wendy's second response to the demands, presumably not engaging with Wendy's offer of an immediate meeting at 4 p.m. The organizers reiterate, although this work should be ongoing, there needs to be a realization that Haverford will never, in its current functioning, become an anti-racist institution. Based on the fundamental principles of higher education and academia and the founding of Haverford as a school for white males, no amount of reform can undermine that history and the legacy it leaves on the institution today. There is no anti-racism without abolition. It is an ideal goal and something that institutions should be working towards every day, but it is dangerous to think of anti-racist work as a box that can be checked off or a benchmark to be achieved. Wendy thanks them for their communication and states that if there's a wish for dialogue at 7 p.m. prior to her communication on campus, to let her or Jesse know. This request is not heeded. The organizers deem only the demand of Black women organizers to be recognized as met. They exempt some past demands like the election day one from this list, which was also a demand fully met by the organizers' standards. Every other demand is either not met or met with qualifications and are then deemed as poorly outlined or not included in a budget. Later that evening, Wendy sends out an email to the public regarding the work in progress spreadsheet and mentioning the newly established accountability group. Reading the sheet that discloses the role of this group assumes that Wendy does not fully agree with the organizers' stance that only abolition or the focus on that ideal will bring about an anti-racist institution, if an abolitionist institution can even exist, rather, without destroying itself. The email continues to thank the work of the organizers and for their courageous strike that brought about these reflections and changes. November 9th marks the 12th day of striking. The organizers send a communication to Wendy and the community about their current stance in the early morning. They bring up how Wendy's email to the community about the spreadsheet and accountability group was 2 hours late. This mention is used as the grounds for justification as to why Wendy's response to them being late on their revisions to the second round of demands was wrong. Wendy's response to our late reply was passive-aggressive and undermined the extra time and effort being used to meet this, quote, shared goal of creating an anti-racist Haverford community and academic institution. After sitting on her response until the late hours of the evening while organizers have waited for 2.5 hours, her response has not addressed a single one of the concerns that we had with the response she provided on Friday. This last edit was made 7 hours ago. If the edit history is to be trusted, Wendy and the rest of her senior staff stopped working on the demands around mid-evening, barely an hour or two after we sent our revisions, and still Wendy and the senior staff waited until 11:22 p.m. to send out these revisions to the community. This represents to us a clear breach of trust for the process of negotiation that the administration laid out. This clear breach of trust is made on trusting edit histories and assuming intention of the admin and Wendy instead of talking to them about these instances. As we've previously communicated, the strike will continue until all demands have been sufficiently met and or accounted for in the form of actions, timelines, outlines, and budget appropriations. 3 demands have been met with qualifications that Wendy did not respond to and therefore remain unmet. Therefore, there are 8 remaining demands that have yet to be sufficiently met. Calls on Wendy to do something as simple as sending an email to our faculty requesting that they not punish students academically for participating in the strike went completely ignored. Our attempt to be cordial with the administration has been reciprocated with rudeness, an intentional delay of communication in order to limit our response and complete inaction beyond what the college felt comfortable committing to after the town hall. It's for these reasons that the strike will go on. On the 13th day, November 10th, the organizers hold one final meeting with Wendy and admin about their last revisions to Wendy's response. Majority of the organizers' complaints and wishes come from them wanting student input, the correct type of student that is, extreme transparency in money and the process of hiring, and making statements encouraging certain actions or apologizing for perceived atrocities. Later that day, the organizers send a document to the Haverford community calling the end of the strike, and for a celebration to be spent at Founders Green that next day. After 13 days of striking against the administration that failed to be actively anti-racist and anti-black, we, the strike organizers, have come to the consensus to end the strike. We want to be clear as to why we are choosing to call a moratorium on the strike. We have made this decision because of the incredible things everyone who chose a strike has achieved thus far. There are 2 major things we want to say tonight. The first is an overwhelming thank you to everyone who organized, built, and created with us, who chose to disrupt the racist and violent systems that Haverford perpetuates and remains complicit in. As we repeated a number of times, the pressure that the college felt was only achievable through our collective strength. The second is that this is, in every sense, barely the beginning of the work. Haverford was created to serve a specific population and perpetuate structural inequality, which we have done our best to start to address. This fight and desire for basic human rights and respect was here before us and will be here after us. The call to action in many of our lifetimes has never been as powerful as it is now, and we choose to contribute and sacrifice for this ongoing movement, and the many coinciding movements like it will be what defines our stories. Be on the right side of history. This is a reminder not just to Wendy, but every single so-called leader of this institution, that BIPOC students will always be ready to mobilize and fight for change when you fail us. Does a tsunami only have one wave? During the celebratory sit-in on November 11th, the 14th day of the strike, it is said that they also brought to stage an alumnus who had been a part of the original 1972 boycott. Identifying himself as Gabe72, he lauded the strikers for their effort and diligence. "I cannot tell you how proud and how pleased I am at what you're doing," he said. In the theme of the strike, however, he also stated that anti-racism work must not be thought to end alongside the strike itself. Please continue the struggle. The fight is not over. It's fair to assume a lot of the tension, fallout, and dissenting opinions were kept in small circles or behind closed doors during the duration of the strike. The organizers themselves state in the division section of the FAQ that there's nothing political about the strike, but you're either for or against this group of people, and unfriending people who don't support the strike is completely acceptable. The organizer's position could be described with the Mott and Bailey trick. The Mott is a defendable and majority agreed upon statement. This could range from the motto, Black Lives Matter, helping the groups of students who are suffering, FGLI or BIPOC, the idea of having a better learning environment for those of any race or disability, or even the idea that Haverford is complicit in some form of implicit racism. Bailey then becomes the organizer's beliefs and motives behind that. Abolishing the school, not allowing any time for dialogue, wanting admin to have overreach control over how the professors run their classes, or the declaration that any position within the strike is a for or against statement. Anytime someone has a disagreement with the organizers' beliefs or motives, they'll point back to their remote positions. This strike is about these people's lives, these demands are their rights, and you're against that? How can you be against these people's lives, their pursuit for their rights, their well-being? Sometimes there's even an admittance that the organizers' methods and motives located in the Bailey are defensible because of how hurt they feel, somehow justifying their tactical means to an end. When these groups of people the organizers are championing behind, BIPOC or FGLI, are brought up in a proper position against them, they dance around it or even go as far as to state all skinfolk and kinfolk and perpetuate the idea that recognizing the presumed struggle from a skin color is wholly reliant on doing what the organizers believe. Even then, they still hide behind the large moat idea that this is for FGLI and BIPOC students, even if students from said categories have neutral standing or disagreements with the strike's demands or methods. The only moment of improper action from a dissenter to a striker / organizer I have is the ripping up of posters and placing them at the door of the Women of Color House. In this photo, it stated that dissenters should be responsible and instead be writing letters of disagreement and not destroying property. I agree with this statement, although I don't think this statement's principle ran true throughout the strike. In the beginning days of the Haverford strike, a student under the pseudonym Publius had some concerns and opinions regarding the strike. After asking the Haverford clerk if they would publish his piece, they replied as so. Although we would be interested in publishing it, with a few edits, we cannot do so while the strike is ongoing. The paper's writers and editorial board members, including ourselves, have already committed as individuals and as an institution to support the strike for its full duration. The paper is only operating right now in order to specifically promote and support the movement. There is a time and place for all voices to be heard, and sometimes that requires a consideration of one's own positionality within the superstructures of intersectional racial dynamics at a place like Haverford. So, it seems that the route of voicing a public opinion not in the closed doors of emails to the organizers or in undocumented office hours wasn't an option in the beginning. With this in mind, Publius ran off over 800 physical copies and spread them around campus. Some were reportedly ripped up by strike supporters, and one copy made its way to the Political Science Bulletin and was then published. It's okay if you don't agree with all or any of the points of this article. That's the essence of honest discussion and debate. You do not need to oppose the demands or the spirit of the strike to recognize the problematic atmosphere of silence and exclusion it has caused. We as the student body have the capacity for disagreement, for conversation, for an open-minded and generous conversation, held in good faith of all speakers no matter their beliefs. This was written by a group of students who care deeply about this college and every student in it. We, much like those organizing and participating in the strike, hope our efforts will bring about a positive change on campus. His general stances on the harsh language towards admin, some of the strikers' demands, and on the police flooded the comments with emotive takes on Publius's prescribed ignorance. There were a few voices that did align somewhat with Publius's opinion, but the overwhelming note was that Publius committed the sin of wrongthink. Two responses came out towards Publius, one from the organizers and one from an individual. The individual states that he's not calling Publius evil, but just stating he's on the wrong side of history. The organizer's response is much more lengthy and reiterates the common quotes and positions seen throughout the strike, belittling the stance of Publius, deflecting stances given with an irrefutable stance, conflating debate with people's lives even though there's individuals in those categories who disagree with the strike, placing anyone against the strike as against making the system of Haverford better, it's not about the emailism, controlling the idea of what nuance and disagreement with their movement means, and painting any person within the BIPOC label as not strong enough to face dialogue about the experiences they're having with any sort of individual, BIPOC or not. They even go as far as to criticize Publius's anonymous stance while he stated the name of the individual who wrote the public article that helped boost the support of the strike in the beginning. This is in complete incongruence with the stance the organizer had fallen back on when criticizing Wendy and the admin for not specifically naming and giving credit to the POC who, quote, made this institution what it is. Jonathan Kay, in his article Race and Social Panic at Haverford, interviewed Publius and noted that things spiraled further on November 8th when a visiting history professor, apparently fired up by the strike to the point of emotional crisis, launched an unhinged anti-racism rant on the campus-wide HC All listserv entitled Dear Haverford Kids, LMAO, got him, take two, in which he cryptically claimed that he had a plan for taking down the artificial hierarchy imposed by white people. When he followed this up by seeking to contact Publius, whose identity was by now known to many, the college reportedly suspended the professor and put Publius in a hotel room for his own protection. The entirety of the strike calls around for the care of those on campus who are the most vulnerable to harm. This encapsulates anyone who is also in ideological agreement with the strikers. I am doubtful of any extension of sympathy given to Publius from any striker or organizer. He asked for this treatment, it seems. But when professors decide to continue classes and expect strikers to get back to work when done striking, or when parents voice opinions and rumors spread of suing, the organizers see this as violence and wielding power against a certain group, their group, not as a consequence of the responsibility of the actions they've taken up. On November 6th, two different dissenting pieces are published. One in the Haverford Clerk titled Why I've Chosen Not to Strike, and one in the By College News titled The Strike's Lack of Open Discussion Undermines Community Trust. The first article received much more constructive criticism towards the author, while the other faced the same sort of vitriol Publius encountered, even though they were no longer anonymous. One of the more interesting developments is a vocal black POC student speaking out in the comment section as a strike opposer. But don't forget, not all skinfolk are kinfolk, and this person is not absolved from the language policing or admits that you can be against us too, alike to what was said to Dean Joyce Bylander earlier in the strike's beginning. In terms of aftermath, we're left with only a few snippets into the current atmosphere, like this one from an anonymous first year. It is again mostly felt within the private lives of these small liberal art colleges' families and friend groups. There was a reported meeting some parents with the president to state their grievances of their children being called racist, and some reports of students transferring or taking a semester off. As of making this, the college has continued to make its committees and allocate the funds it stated in their demands letter. The school even made an article applauding the efforts of these organizers and strikers that propelled them to make these radical and necessary changes. They also uploaded all documents related to the strike publicly for archival purposes. I've omitted from this documentary the comparison I make heavily in my personal investigation, which is this event and the Evergreen State College meltdown of 2017, a building of tensions amplified by an event and even some professors, and an email stretched to extraordinary lengths to then justify an action against the college towards an ever-looming bigger picture. It seems that the strike truly was years in the making, but maybe not in the ways these student activists claimed them to be.